Hello and welcome to the Nad Knows podcast. I'm Nadley, and I'll be your host into the intertwining worlds of science, mythology, creativity, and art. Today is my very first episode where I get to just dive right into topics that interest me, and this topic has been on my mind since 2018, honestly. I was traveling in Mexico and I fell in love with some local art by an indigenous people called the Huichol people. And they have just really beautiful art, these little beads that they place on either bone, wood, and make different patterns. So that night, I did a total hyperfixation mode deep dive into these people. And it led me down just a really fascinating rabbit hole of exploration and curiosity. And I got on to learning about their creation story. And it was just so mythical and just imaginative. And it made me ask more questions. And I just fell in love with the rich story behind all of these pieces of art and the iconography that's in those art. And so that gave me the thought, I wonder what every culture's peoples had as their creation story. And I remember doing a little bit more research after that first night deep dive and feeling a little overwhelmed with the amount of stuff that is out there about these mythologies, but also that it's all very scattered. And I was looking for something that compared multiple all at once to find these commonalities and these common threads. And so when I decided to make this podcast, this was my number one topic that I wanted to just go deep dive on and get to the bottom of things in a sense. And I went full tilt with this research for this podcast. I was researching every continent, and every continent I would have a handful, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 mythologies and peoples from each continent. And it was just so much information. And I honestly overwhelmed myself. I learned so much about all these different cultures, and so many of them are so fascinating and exhilarating. And I wanted to share them all with you guys. When I was trying to sit down and come up with a podcast outline, so to speak, it was nearly impossible. Like, how do I fit all of this in here? So it left me back to the drawing board of, okay, what do I really want to talk about? What do I want to say? And so that led me to what I have put together as the Nad Knows Blueprint to creation myths. And so many of these stories that I was researching, they had so many common similarities and similar symbols and similar themes. And I'm not even close to the first person that has noticed this, been interested in this, but a lot of that information is in really dense format, and it's hard to get a lot from. And so my goal for this blueprint that I've created is to just summarize and briefly touch on some of my favorite stories that fit within these symbols and other stories that have the similarities, but without going so far deep down the rabbit hole, because I have no chill. And I dove just right in and needed to parse it down a little bit. Before we get into everything, there's a couple things I want to make very clear as I'm going through all of these myth stories, and some are very old and others are more recent. And the thing about the very old myths is they were passed down verbally through storytelling and through tradition. And we're lucky to have as much information about some of these really ancient cultures, thanks to some people that decided to tell anthropologists or historians their story, which they did not have to divulge these really sacred parts to their culture. And so, that said, since it's coming from a storytelling background, there are differing stories and explanations and elements to these creation myths of how our world came about. And so if I misspeak and say something that is not in line with, if you have knowledge of that story or those people, know that it's just from a place of there's differing information out there, and some stories expand further and others don't. And there's different trains of thought on probably every single story that I am going to tell. But just know that I'm another person telling this story, and there's going to be personal interpretation no matter who is telling the story. And I don't have the cultural background of each and every one of these myths. And so I am doing my best as to what I've researched online, and have some books that cover these things. And just know that I've tried my best to get to the root of things and get rid of some of the fluff and go direct to the source on some of these stories and myths. So with this blueprint, let's just get into it. While I was doing my research, I just noticed that there was a certain cadence of events that went through a very specific process, whether it's ancient Sumeria from over 6,000 years ago to more recent religions that we might not consider myths. There's common similarities between almost all of them. And so where I've decided to start is with the humble little egg. The egg shows up in almost, I don't want to say almost all of the myths because I have not scratched even the surface, but one of the strongest symbols that shows up in most of these creation stories is with an egg. Sometimes a seed, but predominantly an egg. And there are other points in a lot of these stories that start before the egg. And I just decided that this is the best place to start, that pulls most of these stories together. The egg is a strong symbol in our culture in America and all over the world. It's shown in religious iconography and obviously in Easter. But I think the American view on eggs and religion is it goes with Easter. But in these creation stories, it starts with an egg. The yolk is often seen as the earth or the substance of the earth, and the white of the egg is seen as either the sky and the stars and the heavens or the air around us. It's that separation between the earth and the sky and the air. But the egg symbolizes that which we see as separate, the yolk and the white. But most of these stories start off with what's inside the egg is not separate and it's not balanced, a mixture, and that is called chaos. A lot of these stories, when you go all the way back, it has a lot to do with making order of chaos. And within the egg, it's seen as chaos until those differences of life, the heavier parts that sink down and the lighter parts that separate into the egg white. So the egg shows up, and often it is from this egg, either the earth is born or the creator god in whatever mythology is birthed from. It can vary, but we see the egg in Hindu, in Vedic mythologies. There's a golden egg that is said to have started everything. It's the beginning. It's where Vishnu started, and the golden egg that Vishnu emerged from. So first I want to just say a handful of the myths and religions that did have the use of egg symbology. So we have it in tribes in Africa, like the Dogon, which are in Mali, Africa. Slavic mythology, they have their egg with the tree of life in the middle. It's the world egg that, and the roots in the tree separate the earth from the sky, and that's all contained within that egg, which is similar to Finnish mythology, but also Polynesian mythology, Greek mythology, this cosmic egg or the Orphic egg, which is oftentimes seen with a serpent wrapped around the egg to protect it. In Egypt, Ra was born from an egg as well. And Ra is, there's many gods in the Egyptian world, but Ra is seen as like the main creator god. But my favorite story that I think really encapsulates the meaning behind the egg really well is from Chinese mythology and the story of Pangu. And Pangu is a god that is this hairy creature that has horns and looks a little bit like Bigfoot, but he seems short and squat and has these horns and, yeah, covered in fur. Pangu was in this egg, and so all around him is chaos. It's the mixture of the white and the yolk. Our guy Pangu stays in this egg for 18,000 years. And during that 18,000 years, he is basically separating the yolk from the white and is balancing these two very different things that are all mixed together in chaos. So he is over time separating these two substances of life. And if you think of the yin yang symbol, that is basically what he is creating and part of where that symbology comes from. So he's seen to separate yin and yang in the egg. And once he has it perfectly separated and balanced, he has an axe, conveniently, and breaks through the egg. And when I was doing my initial research for this, I saw the hairy Pangu. Very often there's a drawing that I will put up so you can see what he looks like. And when I was putting together some images for him breaking out of the egg, there's like statues and drawings and stuff, and like Pangu is ripped. Once he busts out of the egg, he is not depicted as this hairy horned monster guy. He is like this ripped man that is breaking this egg apart and thus creating the world. Go Pangu. And it's good that he's ripped, because for another 18,000 years, he basically has the job of holding up the sky. He is like having to literally expand. It said like 10 feet every year or something. I don't know the calculations for that, but it was something like 10 feet every year. He pushed the sky up more and more. So Pangu breaks from the egg. He's expanding the world by pushing up the sky, but he's also has some helpers. He has a dragon helper. He has a phoenix. He has a Quillin, which I may be pronouncing that wrong, which is a dragon horse hooved chimera kind of creature. And then he also has the turtle. While he and his helpers are doing such a good job of expanding the sky, one day Pangu just dies. He dies and he falls to the earth, and his body is then he falls to the earth, and his body is said to have made up the geographic features that we have around us. His breath became the wind and the mist. His voice was thunder. His left eye was the sun, and his right eye was the moon. His head was mountains. His blood turned into the rivers. His muscles were represented by the fertile lands of the soil. His beard and his facial hair turned into the stars and the Milky Way in the galaxies. His hair turned into the bushes and the trees. His bones were the minerals, and his bone marrow, within those bones are precious jewels and crystals that are grown in the earth. His sweat was the rain, and the fleas on his back when he falls to earth became the animals that populated the earth. And so this is a story where the creator God, he worked and worked to create this perfect place for us, and then left without much hand in the day-to-day, although there's still many other gods and deific figures in Chinese mythology. It's interesting for one to, in China, they were believing this myth, and this was a part of their religion around 1700 to 2700 years ago. So at some point, almost 3,000 years ago, this is what they were believing in China. Since then, feng shui is from China, and you can really see that the core tenets of how this world was created by Pangu, and the importance of balance and separation of certain things to bring harmony and balance. I'm here to provide the American lens of things. When Americans generally hear feng shui, we think of, oh, it's to decorate your home properly and have a nice feeling to it. But that's just a little bit of this Chinese mythology that has made it to our sphere of understanding, because before those architecture and interior design practices were really discovered, it was just one of the many ways that feng shui and this Chinese myth and the importance of yin and yang represented in their life. They made their food in a certain way, they make their tea in a certain way, and their whole life is more interpreted with the backbone of balance and harmony and balance of opposites. And we saw it as, oh, I like their architecture. Can you go do that for me? And it's really taking out the byproduct of these core tenets that, back in those days, they were just living their life according to these practices and these beliefs and ways of seeing life. So when they were decorating their homes, of course, they're going to do it with feng shui because that's how they did everything, or in accordance to that mythology. So going back to the blueprint, we have our egg, and now we've heard the story of Pangu, and we know what came of him from the egg. But if you had an egg, it could be a tasty treat. But if you wanted another chicken, that egg needs fertilization. In these creation stories, getting back to the blueprint, the really important piece to accompany the egg is water. And that is usually the fertilizing aspect of this creation situation. In most of these stories, the earth was all water. It was one big ocean. Some say there was like some marshy land, but it was nothing that could ever be built upon. So to me, thinking about this water world, immediately my brain went to, oh, it's the perfect petri dish. And the fertilization usually is referred to the primordial waters. And it's not just water, H2O. It's the primordial waters that have the other ingredients to life within it to be able to be the petri dish that I think they're speaking about in these creation myths. And I have a degree in biology and I took microbiology, and we would prepare our petri dishes. I don't think I ever thought about it before, how you grow these different bacteria on the petri dish, but that dish is made of the stuff called agar, and it's nutrients for the stuff you're trying to grow. So it's not just a little plate and you tell stuff to grow and it grows. There's actual nutrients in there to give it what it needs so that the spores you can put on it will then grow. So to me, this primordial water, and there will be talks about the earth was covered in water and it was just all water. And so it's very easy to spot this common theme within all of these stories. So we have the egg and we have the water. And so what do we do now? We have the perfect ingredients for life, but how do we get to Earth? And my favorite story about how land started forming on this water world is from the Yoruba people, and that's from Nigeria in Africa. And the Yoruba people, theirs started, funnily enough, not necessarily with an egg, but I'll get to that. They have a hierarchy of gods that is, it all goes back to this one god, Olodumare, and I'm very sorry if I'm pronouncing these wrong, but that's the main god. And then he split up and sent off different fragments of that god, of himself, and sent them off to look for habitable planets. It sounds like sci-fi, but this is a part of their mythology. And Earth was found. There were other Earth-like planets that were found, and the other ones were honestly better than Earth because Earth was this water world and didn't have any way to have solid land. And what are you going to do with that? So Earth was honestly cast aside. Oh, we're going to focus on these other ones. And then they were like, nah, I want to see if we can do something with Earth. So one of the gods, Obatala, he was like, I think I can do something with this. I think I can work with this. And the other gods were like, okay, bet. Good luck. So Obatala took the task, and all of the gods chipped in all of their gold and made him a gold chain that could be dropped from the heavens through an open hole, drop down so that Obatala could climb down the chain to Earth. He brought with him a few things. He brought a bag that contained a pine nut seed, that contained a mollusk shell that was filled with soil, the white chicken, and a black cat. And so he's hanging down on this chain, and he can't get all the way down, but he gets far enough and he takes the mollusk shell and starts sprinkling the earth from his mollusk shell down to the earth. And it's still not strong enough to stand on. It's not enough for him. So he throws the chicken down. Chicken's lighter. And what chickens do is spread stuff. So the chicken immediately starts sifting around and spreads this earth around. Eventually, when this chicken is spread around enough, it's sturdy enough for Obatala to hop down, and he jumps down on a little hill. And he gets to work. All right, let's make something of this place. I got enough to stand on. Let's go. So he plants the pine nut seed. So this is the egg symbology in this story. Sometimes, like I said, it's seed. And of course, I got to pick the story that doesn't have an egg. But he plants the seed, the pine nut seed, into the earth. And immediately, like that, a pine nut tree grows. And these are magical. So they drop a ton of pine nuts and they grow more trees. And so he's doing pretty good. He has his little kitty cat for companion. All the other things he brought for kind of a reason, but his cat, the reason was companionship. And if cat owners didn't need another reason why cats are the best, here's another one. You just always got to have a cat with you. He's hanging out, but the cat wasn't enough. He got lonely. So he was like, you know what? Let me make some friends. And we all want to make friends. I wonder if that's why they say, let's make friends. It's because all these gods be making their friends when they get lonely. Anyway, he starts grabbing the soil and getting clay from the earth that he has been developing and starts sculpting these people. And he's working really hard. He's really dedicated. He's just going after it. And he eventually does run out of fumes. I feel like I relate to him because he got on the hyperfixation and I'm gonna make humans. And then man, this is hard. So what he does to take the edge off is he takes his pine nuts and he has created a pine nut wine from the pine nut seeds. And so he's getting drunk on these pine nut wine drinks that he's making for himself, and ambitiously is, yeah, let me just get back to making humans. I'm fine. I can keep making humanity even though I'm plastered. Shut up. And then he unfortunately makes some deformed humans, and he wakes up the next morning and he is so hungover and so sad. It's like that hangover anxiety that's like the reason that no one should drink, because that anxiety is the worst. What did I do when I was drunk? No matter what you did, it's not as bad as creating half of the human race deformed. And he felt awful, and he vowed probably to never drink again, I would imagine. But he also vowed to be the protector of the deformed. So he stayed on Earth. He stayed because he just felt so bad. I fucked them up and I gotta take care of it. I gotta deal with my problems that I created, which is a bummer, but not, because it's really sweet. And I think that just from the way those stories talked about him, he really loved humans. And so he stayed on Earth and helped the humans out, and they ended up creating civilizations, and one thing went to another, and they were doing really good. And he was so happy. He was very proud of himself. But all the other gods knew what he was doing. They were like, go try to do something with Earth. Go for it. And the one god that he didn't ask was the goddess that ruled everything below the sky, which Earth was one of those things below the sky. So she somehow was very distracted and then notices what Obatala was doing with humanity. He took over Earth basically, and she was pissed. She was like, no, that's mine. what are you doing? So she was really mad and waited for Obatala to go back home and see his other god family, brothers and sisters, and Sky Daddy. So then the goddess came down and started flooding the earth because she was like, this isn't his, it's mine, I'm taking it back. And so she flooded the earth, and eventually she decided to stop. She got convinced. The sky goddess's name was Olokun. A lot of them have the Olo or the O names for this culture. So Olokun just demolishes the earth with water pretty much. Obatala finally gets her to stop. There's enough for him to rebuild, and so he continues on. They make an agreement. Fine, your people can live, I guess. And I'm going to have to stop there. There's more to that story, but I do need to get back to the blueprint. But to close out water, it makes so much sense why water is such an important part of this creation story, and why it's such an important part of this creation blueprint, because water rules the earth. All major cities are centered around water. You can't survive without it. So it makes sense for life at all to be created that water is a part of it, because it is what gives you life, and it's what you're able to use to sustain life. And so it really is no surprise why water is such a key part of it. And just to compound on why water is such a ubiquitous symbol in all of these things, I had to think back to when I learned about evolution and how the earth during the Archean age is all water. For 2.5 to 4 billion years ago, billion with a B, it was all water on earth. Were these people around then? No. Did they tap into something that got that kind of right? Somehow, yes. And then I feel like it's a lot to touch on such a big thing, like the flood myths that are also in every culture. And maybe Noah didn't make an ark, but maybe floods have been bothering civilizations for a long time. And so Olokun re-flooding the earth, it tracks with a lot of other different stories. And I'm not just talking about the Christian Noah's Ark story. It goes deeper than that. But like I said, I have to stop there because I could just keep going on and on about it. The Yoruba myths were believed and in practice around 2,000 years ago, around when Jesus was getting born. It's really hard to fully track down how long ago these religions were being practiced, because so much of it was storytelling, and it's so hard to pin back how far these stories came from. And other myths that also have water as this primordial part of their creation story is, again, almost all of them, but Sumerian, Iroquois, Chinese, Vedic, Egypt, Dogon, Polynesia, Hawaiian mythology, Inuit, Huichol, Christian mythology, Catholic mythology. So it's obvious that this is an important part of the blueprint. But we have the egg, we have the water, and then we have the earth that comes. So how do we get the earth to come? So getting back to the blueprint, we now need to figure out earth. We have this creative energy that has come from this egg water mixture, but we sometimes, like in the Yoruba myth, need to get earth from other places. Got to get it from somewhere. And this is where we need to decide, and you have a few options if you were to use this blueprint to create your own myth, which, why not? You can either get the earth from the sky, like the Yoruba myth. That is one example of that. It's also in the Christian creation story. Even in the Bible, the Christian Bible, Genesis 1:2, it said God was hovering over the water, and so essentially brought that earth, from the heavens to the earth. And in Inuit beliefs, they believe that stones from the sky came to earth. Maybe an asteroid? I don't know. Another option is for the earth to come from below the waters. So instead of above the waters, it comes from below the waters. And the Cherokee beliefs is a beetle that dove down into the earth and brought it up and started making these mounds with the mud that was brought up. In the Iroquois belief, the sky woman is the earth diver. She is on the back of a turtle and dives down and reaches down to below the water and puts the mud and creates earth on top of this turtle shell. In Japanese mythology, which would be the Shinto, they explain the creation of the Japanese islands by the twin gods Iganazi and Iganami. They have a jewel encrusted spear, and they dive down and get the mud from under the water and bring it to the surface so they can create the islands of Japan. And another option is to dismember a god and use the body as the earth. That one is my favorite of the three because it's brutal and pretty freaking cool. Examples of this, like the story of Pangu that we already talked about, where he was doing a lot for the earth until he died. And when he died, that was the catalyst of the land masses walking around. Thank Pangu. Or you could thank Ymir in Norse mythology. Ymir is one of their gods, and it's said that his body was also the creation of land around us. Not so fun fact, his brothers killed him, dismembered him, and used his body to seed the planet unwillingly. Sheesh. And he has a similar breakdown the way that Pangu did. His blood was the ocean, his bones were the mountains, his skull was the sky. So I don't know how that worked. If like the skull is like the atmosphere, I don't know. In Norse mythology, they believed around like 1,000 years ago, 1,200-ish years ago. And to me, it's interesting how Norse mythology and Chinese mythology have a very similar breakdown of body parts into land. But Norse mythology, it was believed maybe a little more than 1,000 years ago, whereas with Chinese mythology and Pangu, they were practicing that close to 3,000 years ago. Did they come up with? And even in ancient Babylon, they believed that due to a cosmic battle and fight, one of the gods that was killed, his body was dismembered and became the land masses that we know today. And don't quote me on this, but I'm pretty sure Babylon was probably around 3,000 to 4,000 years ago. So that's predating the Chinese mythology beliefs. Did they get their ideas from them? Was it all migration? It's just interesting. There could also be another category of this, of bodily fluids creating life, because that is another thing that is maybe gross to people that don't like bodily fluids. Interesting about some of these myths, like the blood of this god sprinkled and it became these islands, or there's conflicting reports on Ra from Egypt. Some say that he cried out humans with his tears. Other people think he jizzed out humans. Take whichever one you'd like to prefer to believe. Whichever way you decide to bring the soil to make the land, you still don't have humans. It's still not equated to humans. It's like in Pangu's story, it wasn't until the fleas became the animals, and then I'm assuming humans evolved from that in their mythology. Not sure. But nonetheless, just because you have the earth doesn't mean you have the humans to go along with it. So a lot of these gods had to figure out how to make humans. So these gods, either because of boredom or they wanted to be worshipped, or like Zeus, he just wanted some playthings and the toys for Zeus, he wanted humans. So whatever it is, there's different modes of creating humans now, because again, the earth is all one thing, humans is a whole nother. So there's oftentimes a lot of trial and error that goes into making humans. And one really great example of this is in Mayan culture. There were 3 attempts where the gods made humans or made creatures out of different material. And they found that some materials were better for making humans for some reasons and worse for making humans for others. Let's go over the Mayan version of if you don't succeed, you try again. The first attempt at making humans, and this information comes from the Popol Vuh, which is the primary source of the Mayan mythology and stories. So the first attempt at making some little creatures, that Mayan gods used mud. So they slapped together some mud and they realized that these creatures aren't going to do anything. They were shapeless. They were not able to worship properly. They were like, that's not going to work. They wiped those out and then decided to try again. This time they tried with wood. And although it was better at holding form than mud, they still didn't really have any success. They were strong, but they didn't lack any souls. They didn't have any emotions. They couldn't understand things. And if you can't understand and have emotions, you probably can't worship the gods. So they were not interested. They wiped those ones out again. And the third time's a charm. These gods decided, let's use corn, maize. Maize had the perfect combination of everything. It wasn't too rigid. It wasn't too soft. It made the perfect human. They used a mix of yellow and white corn, which could be a good tortilla recipe as well. And to this day, the Mayan gods have not needed to try another material. It worked. Corn was the ticket. They figured out, they said these people got substance and we're good. They really figured it out with corn. And it makes sense because corn fed and nourished those people. You are what you eat. It makes sense. And does it making sense in reality? Oh, duh, they just ate a lot of corn. That's why they picked that. That doesn't really make it not special and not make it worthy of being held at such a high prestige to say that we were made from corn, because we were in those times. They survived on corn. It was them. Just like the water. It's like you pay reverence to the water because it's so important. So we were paying reverence to the corn. And I love corn. But my favorite made from clay creation of humans story is none other than Prometheus and Zeus from the Greek mythologies. I don't know why I love this story so much. It is really heartbreaking and it is really sad, but there's just something about it that just makes me feel good. So Zeus and Prometheus, they were best friends. This is a story of best buddies. Zeus is obviously a not easy person to get along with. He was very spirited. He had a lot of personality. He didn't really give a fuck about what anyone or anything else wanted. He was Zeus, so he was going to do whatever he wanted. But Prometheus was just special. Everyone loved Prometheus. He was just the sweetest guy, the nicest guy, and him and Zeus just were best buds. They were an inseparable duo, and Prometheus noticed that Zeus was being sad and mopey until one day Zeus comes to Prometheus with the best idea. I got all these other animals. I have horses, I have elephants, I have birds, I have dolphins. He loved his dolphins. But he was like, I want some little me's. Like he wanted some little hymns and he wanted to make some humans. And at first, Prometheus was like, I don't know, it could get messy. And Zeus was like, no, this is going to be the best idea. Don't worry. We're going to have so much fun. They're going to be our little besties and then we're going to make him do whatever we want. And it seemed like Prometheus, he was just good at everything. So Zeus was like, you are going to shape them for me and make them. But I'll tell you how I want them. I'll tell you what I want and you make them. So Prometheus was like, all right, bet, I'm down. Let's do it. And because Prometheus was an artist, he was like, I need my space. I need to be alone to shape these humans. Prometheus and Zeus set off traveling the earth, trying to find the perfect soil to make these figures from. So Zeus and Prometheus set off. They travel the world until they find the perfect clay that has exactly the right things in it to make their humans. And so once they find this clay, Prometheus is like, all right, leave me alone. I'm time to work. And they're like, all right, let him cook. And Prometheus had so much fun making these little humans. He made one of every color. There was purple, blue, red, yellow, violet, green. He had all these people and he was making them. Oh, and before he sent Zeus on his way to leave him alone so he could get to work, he asked for some spit, and that's what he was using to like moisten the clay with. Again, that's the water and the primordial water kind of imagery. And so Zeus eventually is, dude, we got to go check on Prometheus. I know he said he wanted to be alone, but I'm dying over here. So him and his daughter, Athena, they were just prancing along, doing Zeus things, and were just all excited about getting to see his little babies soon. And so he's just fumbling along, and in his excitement, smashes the green, blue, and purple people. He just smashed them with his big ass foot. And Prometheus is freaking out. These were my babies. He's gum attached. And he was very upset. Zeus was like, it's fine. You have like all these other colors. It's no big deal. Shut up. And Prometheus was like, whatever. He was still just really excited to get the show on the road because they still needed to be breathed life into. And Zeus was like, oh, Athena, you can do that. So Athena blows life into these figurines and they become alive. And these first little group of humans are like, what the fuck are those? There's giant people staring at us and yelling at us. And Zeus was all excited. And Prometheus was like, shut the fuck up, dude. Chill. We're scaring them because they're like, ah. So Zeus has the bright idea to like, hey, let's shrink down to their size. Or maybe it was Prometheus that had that idea. I can't remember. So they shrink down to human size, which definitely helped calm after a while the new people's nerves. And so they're down on human level, all small, and Zeus is just like so excited. He's so stoked and he's just, I did it. I created people. This is what we're going to be known for and everyone's going to love this. Prometheus was just obsessed. He was obsessed with his humans. He cared for them so much. He pretty much decided, I'm going to stay here most of the time, teaching them how to do life and how the world works and all that. I want my little people I want my babies to survive. So Zeus sensed this going on and he's, hey, no, we just need them to survive so they can worship us. And if I know Zeus, he's probably planning on banging him too, of course. And so we don't care about them. They're just our playthings. And Prometheus was like, bro, no, I was chill when you squashed my green, purple, and blue people. But no, these are my babies. I'm going to take care of them. And Zeus was like, God, you're so weird. Fine, but promise me that you will not teach them how to make fire. Because if you teach them how to make fire, they're going to become more powerful than us. We cannot give them our secrets. And Prometheus was like, fine, I won't teach them how to make fire. Chill out. So then Zeus went on his merry way. And I think he was just sad that he was losing his best friend, essentially. But the more Prometheus stayed with his babies, he just fell more and more in love with them. And he just wanted the best for them. And he was like, they deserve everything possible. And so he felt he had to teach them how to make fire. And so he broke his promise to Zeus. And Greek mythology, Greek gods, they take their word very seriously. They do not say something and then if you call them out, you said this, they have to do it. Your word is very important if you're a Greek god. So Prometheus went against his word and gave humans the ability to make fire. And Zeus obviously finds out about this. You can't really keep that a secret. So Zeus was pissed. He was heartbroken. It was his best friend. His best friend betrayed him. He's also scared that these humans might become more powerful than him now. And so he is terrified. He also takes out that fear and anger onto his best friend. He is so betrayed and so hurt by Prometheus that he banishes him to the underworld, to Hades, and ties him to a rock and has birds eat out his liver every day. And then overnight, his liver grows back and gets picked out by birds and ravens every single day. He banished him for eternity. He said, you are going to live with what you did. And it's interesting because they say that the liver is the seat of the emotions. And so with our emotions, we're feeling, with our liver, we're feeling our emotions. And one of them can be the sadness and the love that Prometheus had for us. Thank Prometheus next time you light a fire or enjoy anything that has to do with fire. Thanks, Prometheus. Pour one out for our homeboy Prometheus, who I will tell you, spoiler alert, Prometheus eventually, not immediately, but eventually gets out of it. And so that will have to be another story for another day too. So back to the blueprint. Whether you created your humans out of mud, out of clay, out of wood, or clay with it, and breathed into life by Athena, whatever it is, you now have your little human race and you have your little babies. Now you have to decide, am I going to stay with my little babies like Prometheus did and help them out? Or am I going to leave and say, here you go, created this, bye, kind of like Pangu did? Do you peace out and say best of luck? Or do you leave instructions and peace out and say, here's how to live, see you later? Throughout all these myths, there's examples of both. Greek mythology, Prometheus sticks around and teaches us how to be good humans and be civilized. In Christianity, which a lot are familiar with, God sticks around, and even though he's a vengeful and bitter God in the Old Testament, he is a loving God in the New, but he stays around and communicates somehow. In Hinduism, we have Vishnu, and he is the seen to be creator God in Hinduism. And similarly to Christianity, he is seen as a trinity as well, although their pantheon of gods, Hinduism, is very expansive. The Vedics and the Hinduism, that was probably practiced 3,500 years ago, whereas Christianity is around 2000. Another example is Odin from Norse mythology, where he stuck around on Earth to protect us from chaos. And it's crazy to think about that Norse mythology, Odin, Thor, these myths that we use in our Avengers movies and stuff, people believe that in just 1,000 years ago. It's very recent. And to think the similarities between that practiced religion around 1,000 years ago has a lot of similarities to like Sumerian myths were 5,000-6,000 years ago. So these archetypes have been in our world forever. And are we just rinsing and repeating and using and abusing and using them for our own benefit? Or are we getting on to something and trying to figuring something out, and there's just one common story that's being told? It's confusing. Another example of the gods that said, yes, I want to take care of my babies, is the Dogon people of Mali in West Africa. And even still today, they say that this Nomo, which is one of their kind of creator gods, Nomo's spirit will these priests, and then those priests will be guided to picking the next priests, which that's a good segue into thinking like, okay, at what point were these people just using this for power? Okay, I'm a priest, I'm going to pick another dude to be the priest and say that it was Nomo. Or are they actually channeling these spirits? Like, I'm not here saying these are all real and not myth, but at the same time, I'm also not here to say that they're not. Are we talking to one God? Are we talking to 20? The other side of this thing is the gods that seed the earth and say, good luck, humans, here's your instructions, or not, and then dip out and say later, good luck. Those Mayan gods tried 3 times to create humans, and then after the third time, they dipped out. Obviously, there's a lot of Mayan myth and quote unquote instructions that were left by those gods, but the one created humans ended up leaving us behind. And that was believed around 1700 years ago, just a bit longer than the Norse mythology to put things into a somewhat of a timeline. In Sumeria, which is modern day Iraq, the gods made humans, and they were basically for toiling and doing the physical labor, and just created them like tools to be slaves. And was that a tactic that empire was using to make slavery valid or something to be praised in their society so that they could use slave labor? Maybe not. I don't know. And that was practiced around 6,500 years ago. And then again, Pangu is another example of just coming in and dipping out, having to dip out after a while, and didn't really leave instructions for people other than in the form of those myths, basically being the only hints that Pangu left. And then there are more that are scattered in between that are in and out in their role of humanity. We went from the egg all the way to people, when people came about. There's more that takes place before the egg on a lot of these stories. And there's obviously a lot more that takes place after people came about. And although these stories seem so fantastic and out of this world and just so crazy to some extent, they're not crazy. They're the myths that surrounded those cultures at that time. And whether we like to think about it, admit it, or not, myth is all around us. Myth is creating our worldview. There were so many times in doing this research where I was so surprised at the things that I was learning, whether it was things that I felt had connections to science and some real scientific theories, and things that you would think the church or religion would not be supporting as well. And there were a lot of moments that I was very surprised, and learning about how some of these other cultures were so far advanced for their time that there's got to be something and some intelligence that they were tapping into or had received some information from that was passed down through stories. This intelligence was beyond the internet or beyond writing. A lot of this stuff starts in Sumeria because they started writing then, and all the places that developed language and some way of communicating, those are the ones that have first dibs at saying this is what happened. And before then, it was just migrating, exchanging ideas, and using things all around them to build the myth of how they felt like they were in this world at all, how they arrived. And if you're someone who does have really firm beliefs, sometimes hearing these things can make you feel a little uneasy. No, that's my thing, or that's the Bible's thing, or that's the Quran's thing, or that's there is no God, that's my thing. Like, whatever your thing is, if this is uneasy to hear some of these stories and ideas, it doesn't have to be like, I'm comforted by it. I'm comforted by that we, and I say we as in the thousands of years of people that have been talking about this, wondering about this, and trying to put shit together. Because there is a lot to put together, and we're in a time where we have access to it, and we're lucky to access a lot of it. For one of the cultures that I was researching, the Dogon people, the only reason we know about their mythology is from an anthropologist that dedicated his life to these people and to this tribe, to learning about them. And he spent over 20 years with these people when the elders would not speak to him. Because again, he didn't have books to read about what they believed, he didn't have anything. He was literally there wanting to learn and wanting to find out what they believed. And after these years that he dedicated to the Dogon people, one of the elders finally relented and said, all right, I'll tell you. And they sat in a room every day for 33 days, and this elder told him everything. He wrote figures in the sand of some of the symbols and things that the elder did, and the anthropologist rewrote them. These people proved the existence of one of the Sirius stars. It was Sirius B. Their oral history talked about the existence of that star thousands of years before its discovery in 1862. And I read some arguments on why they were able to do that. And it wasn't because of any knowledge they had. It was because there were less lights and light pollution then, and they were able to actually see it with the naked eye, which, I mean, maybe. But they were able to observe and record this star and its path and its intertwining path with Sirius A. And this anthropologist wrote and drew the paths of these intersecting stars, and it exactly matches with the pathways of those stars as recorded by astronomers. And how could they have seen a star that they didn't observe without a telescope thousands of years before astronomers? Make it make sense. It doesn't make sense. But if it wasn't for that elder, we wouldn't have access to any of this information. Those 33 days where that anthropologist was writing down everything this guy said, I'm sure he was just like dying and hoping he got it all. What has been lost to us is immense. And what's been manipulated through time is also immense. When we go back to these core tenets of these different stories, I can see them ring true with so many different trains of thought. You can rationalize anything one way or another using these stories and using these myths. And I wanted to end this podcast with a segment I'll call questions to wrinkle your brain, because although I would love to have a smooth brain all the time and just be super smooth brain and not worry about a single thing, I think it is good to wrinkle your brain. Just try to crack into your worldview a little bit and peek out every now and then on how you view things. And when you find out something is not in accordance to your worldview, let it feel good, let it feel comforting, let it show you growth. And so the first question I want to ask is, did you know that there's a version of Norse mythology that did not include Odin and Thor and all of these gods that we know and love so dear? I was doing the research into Norse mythology, and I just really wanted to get to the root of things and try to track it back to where the inspiration for these certain things came from, and what did they believe before that. And I got back to a point that was like, oh, they didn't believe any of this stuff. They believed in gods and spirits, but it wasn't like the pantheon of gods and these personified men and women and Valkyrie and all these things. The god of wind, it was the god of water, it was the animal spirits, it was the crop, it was the moon, it was the sun, it was these bigger, way bigger players in this cosmic story than a man in the sky, a man wherever, or sometimes women, but mostly men, for sure. There was a whole Norse mythology that was with the Norse people, and they did not believe that stuff. And they believed in a very more animalistic kind of spirit, ancestor guided kind of thinking. And that was, again, more than 1,000 years ago. And the Viking age is whenever we know of Norse mythology and we relate to the Viking age version of Norse mythology with Odin and Thor and all that. But before these Slavic and German tribes started migrating and mixing with other people, they pretty much and independently on their own believed in these more shamanistic, animalistic, spirit guided, based on the elements of the world aspect of things, and not so much that this god is the god of war and this god is the god of this and this one does this. And it really wrinkled my brain because when you think of Norse mythology, you think of that stuff. And so learning that the migration of these Germanic and Slavic tribes and them mixing together, it caused war and it caused tension. And so to maintain control, it was really convenient to have a god of war or a god of whatever to strengthen you, to make you strong. And in their belief system, and I'm certain people still believe this today and have every right to, but that you go to Valhalla from dying in battle. How convenient is that for a people that are now migrating and having to battle other people? Seems convenient. Or is it what that army or whatever needed to fortify themselves to take on all these battles, when in the past they were dealing with the wind and the rain and making sure that their people were fed and praying to the animal spirits, that et cetera, et cetera. So the view we have of all these things, they have not been in place forever. And I think, speaking from experience with myself, we have the view of things we believe in today as being rigid and set in stone, and this is the way it is, and believe it or don't. And I grew up religious in the Christian church. I then, as an adult, went to school and studied science and have a degree in biology. And I towed in the waters of being atheist and believing that religion was a joke and that it's all fake and it's not real and God's not real. And I've dabbled in those areas for sure. And although I have a different view on things today and my own personal belief system that doesn't really attach to one thing or another, I still had the mindset that Christianity and like Catholicism and Orthodox Catholicism, those things are very rigid. And I think that way because Christianity is rigid. And I was brought up in a very rigid, no, you have to believe this mindset. And I was so surprised to learn this next little tidbit. So it's the next question to winkle your brain. Did you know that the Catholic Church accepted the theory of evolution in 1950? For some people, they might be like, yeah, I knew that. I did not. I absolutely did not. I have the view that if you are religious in pretty much any Abrahamic religion, Christianity, Catholicism, Islam, any of that, I had the view that you do not believe in evolution, that you do not believe of the natural process of evolution and evolving over time. No. Pope in the 50s was like, yeah, that sounds right. I'll believe, yeah, we're accepting that. Also in the 1950s, they also accepted the theory of the Big Bang. And that to me was even more of a shock, way more of a shock. And I just always assumed that the Catholic Church would have a more staunch view on these things. And then really quite the opposite. It's mostly the Christian church. And I'm sure there are plenty nowadays that believe in accepting of some scientific theories and things like that. But there are so many that don't believe in evolution and will fight you tooth and nail on it. It's so crazy that we're still fighting about some of these things. and that Christianity is really the only one that is holding on so hard to being right. It's not about being right. And another thing that I think a lot of people would be surprised to hear if they were raised in a Christian mindset, even if not Christian, but like adjacent or light. It forms our worldview. In the Quran, for Muslims, they love Jesus. The Quran does not deny that Jesus was born of a miraculous birth. They love Jesus, and he is a very important prophet and share his teachings. If you were to have told me 5 years ago that Muslims love Jesus, I hope that I wouldn't have been surprised. I hope I would have been like, yeah, that sounds like right. But I think I would have been surprised. And that's like maybe showing my ignorance. And I was just surprised. And I think that it's purposeful that we don't know these things, that how we're all talking about the same thing and we're all sharing the same stories and the same types of stories, like of just what it is to be a human. Anyway, I still have another question to wrinkle your brain. Talking about the miraculous birth of Jesus that Islam does not argue with, did you know that Jesus was not the only miraculous birth in Christianity and Catholicism? I just assumed that he was the only one. Little asterisks. Other religions have tons, and mythologies have tons of other examples of miraculous births. But for this question to wrinkle your brain, it's more about just Christian and Catholic kind of views of things. Did you know that Mary, Jesus' mother, according to the Immaculate Conception doctrine or text, is that Mary was also born of a miraculous birth? She was born to her parents that were older, and they were not within the childbearing age. And an angel visited and said, "You're going to have a baby." And the mom was like, "No, I'm not. Definitely not." And they're like, "Yeah, you are." And sure enough, she became pregnant at an old age with Mary. So she's pure because even her conception was not tainted by dirty sex. This is one thing that Christianity disagrees with Catholicism. They don't think that she had an immaculate conception of Mary. They believe that Mary was free of sin in her daily life, but in terms of like the conception of Mary, Christians do not agree with Catholics on that one. Just that she was free of sin in her daily life, which made her good enough to have Jesus. Sounds like a little bit too much emphasis on purity, and that could be used as a form of control, but I digress. The other immaculate conception or miraculous conception is one that Christianity does agree upon, is John the Baptist. And John the Baptist was born to another older woman that was out of childbearing years, and the angel visited her and her husband and said, "You gonna have a baby and he's gonna be a preacher." And the husband was like, "What? No, we're not. Shut up. You're being so stupid. That's obviously not gonna happen." And the angel was like, "Bitch, shut your fucking mouth," and made him mute until John the Baptist was born, which I thought was a hilarious flex. And yeah, we think that these things are like concrete, and there's all these other little exceptions and magical and mystical things happening that wasn't just Jesus being born of a virgin. And again, other stories and religions and myths also have plenty of examples of immaculate conception for various deities or prophets or what have you. We are all telling the same story. That's what I'm coming to believe, because at this point, I've seen too many similarities. I've seen too much stuff, and it seems a little bit too coincidental. And just one other thing, it's not really a question, but it's another thing to wrinkle your brain. In the Big Bang, they say that as the light and the particles traveled out after that first bang, the light and the matter, they were conjoined, they were together. And then as it emanated out, eventually the photons and the matter were able to finally be separate. And that was a big turning point in the formation of matter and other things in that cosmic spew. But to me, it reminds me of when Pangu was in the egg and he had to separate the white from the yolk. And that separation just sounded a little bit too similar to the separation of the light and the matter. And that being separate was what gave matter a chance to start building up in complexity over time and expanding, that gave way to us. So even coming into present day and present day scientific theories, we can still weave them back in to myths that they were believing 3,000-4,000 years ago. So whatever you believe it. It doesn't matter as long as it is true to you. And if you shape your people and your humans out of wood, mud, or clay, it doesn't matter. Because like the Mayan gods, like Huichol, he learned after the first attempt, and then went on to the second, and went on the third. We can make mistakes, we can learn from them, and implement the knowledge that we learn from them. And that's what we want to get out of this. I feel like it's hard for me to wrap this all up into a pretty little bow. But I think that with this blueprint, you can see some of the elements that we need to incorporate into our lives, just like with feng shui, where it's not just about the interior design, it's about how we view life. That if you have these things that you believe in that help you and enrich you, bringing those out into everyday life is how we get through it and how we make sense of the human condition. There were a lot of my personal favorite mythologies and indigenous beliefs from around the world that I did not speak on. And it was really hard to decide which ones to talk about and which ones not to. And so for some of my favorites, like my number one that got me into all of this is the Huichol people. And I'll have to do a full deep dive into them and some of my other favorite people. Another tribe in Africa that I love is the Tuareg people. And so this is just a taste of what I have studied and have been talking about. And it's honestly my first time putting it all together and making sense of everything, trying to at least, and getting it out of my brain. So I look forward to sharing more of this kind of content. And if anyone is interested, I would happily share access to my research document that has it all broken down by continent. It has all the symbols that are broken down, the egg, the water, the divers that go into the water and get the earth, all these different things that I talked about. I've broken them all down. And so if you want access to that, I would happily share it. So just either message me and I will happily give you that if you want to have a little rabbit hole and get into some of this stuff. And if you have any questions, if you have any comments about things that I might have gotten wrong or misspoken about, which absolutely can happen, there are a million ways to tell these stories, and they have been told a million ways. From the research that I've done, this is how I've made sense of it. And so my apologies if I've gotten it wrong. And please let me know if there are any things from your lens that are conflicting. But I look forward to getting into more of these topics with everyone and just seeing how this is received from all of you guys. And I don't know, now that you have the blueprint, why don't you come up with your own creation story and your own creation myth? What kind of people would you create, and what kind of world would they build?